Welcome to another podcast of onRec. Today, we have a very special guest with us, one of our Machao alumni of IIT Roorkee. She's currently working as a senior product designer at Meta. Formerly, she was working at Microsoft, and she's the 2019 graduate from IIT Roorkee Architecture Department. So, hi, Parinishtha, how are you?
Hi, I'm good, Shreya, and it's nice to be here and talking to you. Um, yeah, and I think you've already done a very good job of introducing me, so I don't have a lot to add.
Okay. So, how's life at Singapore?
Singapore is very nice. I think Singapore is like one of those places where they have cracked how the ideal sort of urban setup should work. So everything is very easy to get around, very easy to use. Everybody follows all the rules. Like the bus always comes on time and like it will basically take you everywhere before time. So that ways it's a very easy city to live in. It's also a very great place to travel outside. So it's well connected with Southeast Asia and also like other parts of the world in general. It's very easy to get to the airport. So I've been traveling a lot since I've been here. Singapore itself is very tiny though. So after like I think it's almost a year or so of me being here, and after a while you sort of start getting done with the place and it becomes slightly boring also. So that's one downside. Yeah.
Okay, okay. So, can you tell our audience a bit about your 5-year journey at IIT Roorkee?
Yeah. So I started my journey in 2014 and I was an architecture graduate. I was one of the people who knew that you can't do a branch change from architecture, but I still chose architecture because I considered myself to be a creative person. I had no idea about what architecture is like actually to practice. I just had a vague idea of what architects do, and just based on that, I was like, hey, okay, fine, let me just take up architecture. Yeah, and then I came to campus, and I think there was a lot of self discovery in the first year, and also just discovery about what architecture really is like, which I realized is might not be the best career path for me. But yeah, so first year was basically just that, right? And I think for me, one more thing that I was very excited about was that I was in an IIT setup, and that there were so many like college clubs, there were so many activities happening. So I was really like, hey, let me try out everything I can. I went for all the auditions, club exams, whatever, like everything. I just used to sign up for everything, and like just go and try to get myself into different groups. I got myself into like a lot of groups in the first year, and then I think I was yeah. So that was like the swimming team that I was part of. Then there was SDS Labs where I was a designer, and there was Geek Gazette, the magazine that I was also a designer at. I don't even remember if I was in anything else, but there was like a couple of things I was trying to do. And second year was also similar, where I was trying to like juggle architecture along with all of the student groups on the side. But I think by second year, I had a lot more like slightly more clarity about UX, and I was working on projects inside SDS Labs also, and just like learning from seniors over there of like how this is done. And I was then keen to like do UX internships. The second year onwards, I started like focusing more on like, hey, how can I build out a career in UX? Um, yeah, and that was tough because architecture can get very hard to juggle, right? We used to have like a lot of assignments. I remember when we used to like we were expected to stay up at night, we were expected to like work on the weekends and just like pull through stuff. um so it was, I think it was um slightly challenging, but at the same time I had a 5-year course, so I had multiple shots at doing internships, right?
Yeah.
And I think first internship was I think second year, somewhere between second and third year. I worked with Oyo Rooms, and then I did in another internship in my third year with housing.com, then one at Amazon, and finally like my final internship was at Microsoft, post which I got the PPO and I basically joined there full time. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. So, like everyone knows that you started doing your, design journey from first year itself. So, your first internship was at Oyo. So, how did you figure out that you really want to design, and did you explore other fields and then figure out, or was it something that you really had interest in?
Yeah. In my case, I think it wasn't like, I tried out a lot of different things and then like, hey, let me do this. I think one thing that sort of happened is that I was consciously focusing on this. At some point, when I was writing the STS Labs entrance exam, I did consider also writing the coding exam. I think, in fact, me and my friends went to what's that place where the lecture hall where you, yeah, we almost went to LHC. That was the venue of the exam, but for I don't know for what reason we didn't end up writing that. And then I got into design in SEO, and there was like a mix of serendipity plus me never feeling the need to like try a lot else. So I mostly just figured out how to do better in UX. Architecture was there, something on the side that I was trying, but I never consciously thought of myself becoming a very successful architect. But with UX, I think I sort of kept at it, right? And in my case, at that time, the industry was also like much newer. So there was like more demand, less supply. And just having that single point focus on like, hey, just like doing all the projects and all the internships, like basically just doing this one thing helped with me being able to focus more energy in it. Yeah.
Yeah, right, right, right. So, like you did multiple internships in the field of design. So, how do you used to manage college and, internships both at the same time?
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I feel like I was just being smart about it in the sense that I would start applying at the right times and then like basically make sure that every semester break I have something
Okay.
where I can go and intern. And sometimes the semester breaks would be a bit shorter. So another thing I would do is that once exams wrap up, just like leave a little early or like join back as late as possible. I don't know if I'm supposed to give this advice, but one thing that you can do is they can pay a late fee and you can join much later. So they
Yeah.
have a deadline. You can join, like you can extend that deadline and you'll have to pay a late fee basically. But it gives you like 10 days more, right? So I mean, I used to take that. And then when semesters are starting up, I think the first week, usually with classes and everything, it's not like this cover a lot of syllabus anyway. So it was hard to catch up even when I joined, let's say, 10 days late into the semester. So that's how generally I used to manage it. And the whole like applying for internships wala part was done along with just the normal classes in college and just yeah.
Yeah. So, like, how do you used to apply for internships? And, like, do you have any tips for students now, who are struggling with, getting internships and all?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I can share some tips. And to be honest, I mean, I also feel like the difficulty level of landing internships has gone up, especially this year,
Yeah.
because the market is very bad. I mean, I'm experiencing it as a professional also. So I can imagine that for freshers who are just starting out, it's even more difficult, right? So, but I can share my tips. I think there's a few things that you can do. I know a lot of people have a dedicated spreadsheet where they keep writing all the stuff. So talk to your seniors, talk to everyone around you, and then like just get these resources. If anyone has compiled any list of companies, etc., that you can look at. Another thing is that you build up your LinkedIn profile. At that time, things like Dribble and Behance were also very popular, right? So like build up like those profiles, have like a portfolio website. It doesn't have to be perfect, but have something that you can keep sharing with people. Just have all of that set up and then on LinkedIn start connecting with as many people you can in the companies that you're interested in interning, right? And what I used was a mix of applying on the career pages. So sometimes companies will release, hey, UX intern opening, right? And then you go and you apply it to that through their career pages or get some of your seniors who are working in that company to give you a referral for it. So that or on LinkedIn, like organically message people because a lot of the times, at least startups and all, they don't officially come out and list internships, right? But if you are in touch on LinkedIn with people on Twitter also, right, and you can like basically keep reaching out to them, sharing your work, and be like, "Do you have internships?" etc. Sometimes you'll be surprised that those cold emails and sort of like just organic connections can also like lead to someone putting in your name and then you being interviewed for the internship, right? I feel like Oyo I can't even remember how I got it. I think I use multiple channels. One is just texting people who are designing at Oyo. One is like writing through their careers page, right? And then I got a call back and got in. Similarly for housing.com. I think I applied to them. I wrote to them for their careers page and just like, yeah. there's like a lot of outreach that you need to do. So I used to send a lot of emails in bulk every day, everywhere, and some of them work out. But I would say that, yeah, cast your net wide, and make sure that you're looking at all the set of companies who are available, who are hiring. Make sure that you're connecting with people, you're building a network of people, including your own seniors as well as including other people in the industry, and make sure that you're updating your work online. It could be in any format, but it should be out there. So yeah, if you keep doing this, I think you can get something. Yeah.
Yeah. So okay, so now let's talk about your time at Microsoft. So, would you like to share with us your experience at Microsoft or whatever projects you did at Microsoft?
Yeah, I think I loved working at Microsoft. In fact, I'm so happy. Like I'm totally okay to just like go back to Microsoft because I had a great experience there. I worked on two products. One was Microsoft Edge, which is the browser, and the second product that I worked on was Microsoft Teams, right? Microsoft Edge is not something that I chose. It was just something that when I interned the first time, I was sort of assigned to that team, and the leaders in the team liked my work, so they hired me back to the same team, right? And at that time it was still in a very early stage, in the sense that um, first there was Internet Explorer, right, which was Microsoft's main browser, and then Microsoft decided to replace that with Edge. And Edge had a previous version as well. This is the new version, which is Chromium based.
Yeah.
So when I interned, we were still designing the previous version of Edge, and then when I joined back full time, that was when the team was building the new version, which is a completely new product that was being designed in house. And our team in India, we used to collaborate with another team in the US, but a lot of the heavy lifting was happening. A lot of the sort of core features were being built on, like, how do we create a great experience, right? Because one of the things was, hey, we want to compete with Chrome. So how does Edge, which is a Microsoft product, which is replacing Internet Explorer that has such a tarnished reputation, right? Like Internet Explorer was the biggest meme on the internet.
Yeah.
So like, you have to replace that. The product has to be so well designed that like people are able to trust it. Like, hey, I can actually use this browser, right? So that was a great learning experience for me in terms of collaborating with across sort of with like a global studio, working on a world class product, working on a really large scale. And also the great thing that I got to do there was we were trying to create a lot of differentiator features, like incubating a lot of new features, right? Like, hey, we have a browser, fine, but what else can we do which makes it special, or like which gives people a reason to use it. So at that time I was working on assistants in the browser. Now we have some recent releases with OpenAI, and like basically being you can use natural language, right? When I was working also, I was incubating some of these features, so it was pretty cool to see some of them come to life recently. And during that time also we managed to ship some stuff around shopping assistants, etc., in the browser, right? So that was pretty cool. And then when COVID was happening, I think Microsoft Teams sort of grew into becoming this hero product at Microsoft and had huge sort of user share. Was a product that was used in very different settings. So companies use it, schools and enterprise, sorry, and universities use it. It was used on mobile as well as desktop. So I mean, I found it pretty enticing to join that studio and see like, hey, let's work on a new product. And then I joined the Teams team, and I was there. And in Teams, I basically working on designing the calendar and the notifications experience inside it. I think that was also a pretty cool sort of experience for me, because I was designing across form factors, right? How does a calendar behave on phone, on, let's say, desktop? And a calendar is a huge canvas, and events can be of so many different types, right? And they get shared across the ecosystem in so many different places, right? Including like people sending you on like on WhatsApp, someone putting it on LinkedIn, someone sharing it on email. So there were like all of these surfaces at a system level that I could touch upon, that it was a very interesting project for me to sort of work on it. Yeah, and yeah, that I think that summarizes my time in Microsoft. Some of the things that I also got to do in Microsoft was just like do a lot more of like 3D stuff, and work on more product vision sort of mock-ups, and like basically like how to create vision videos in 3D and stuff like that, which was more like fun activities we used to do on the side. Yeah.
Yeah. That's great. That's too much of knowledge in, in a short time. Okay. So as a self-taught designer, did you ever feel that, you need to do masters, or should really people pursue uh masters in the field of design?
Um, yeah, that's a good question. So personally, this is my take, is that now I don't really feel the need to do a generic design masters,
Mhm.
but and this is mainly because I feel like working in the industry for a while now, I have a sort of sense of how design processes work and like how do you basically build stuff out. So I have more like hands-on experience, and I feel like that helps me more, sort of in the industry rather than going back and doing a master's. But in some cases doing a master's might be relevant. So for example, if I feel like in one particular area, right, I want to, let's say, go deeper, so then I can do a more sort of a deeper master's into that rather than doing a generic sort of master's of interaction design. Or I think the other case in which doing a master's helps is to get your foot in the door, right? So sometimes, like if you're coming from another field, it's not always very easy to directly switch into getting good UX jobs, right? So one way is that you try to do it in like through internships and like self-taught ways, like I was able to do, right? But it's a lot of also time and space and the opportunities that you get, right? And sometimes if you feel like your career is going to get a boost because of doing a master's, then I think it might be worth going ahead and doing it. And there are some really good institutes in India also. I think IIT Bombay, IIT Guwahati, and then the NIDs. And then there are some good design schools in Europe and the US as well. So depending on the budget that you have and basically the kind of exposure you want, doing a master's might be a really good path to follow as well.
Yeah, okay, that's great. So, like, have you ever felt any friction in getting jobs and internships in the field of design, as you're from an engineering background? And yeah, and especially when we talk about companies like Microsoft, Meta, and Google. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think once you get your portfolio to a certain level, and you're able to ace the interviews, right? I think the main thing is like, can you get your foot into the interview process, right? So obviously, if you're from a design school, they recruit from your school. It's like, yes, you have a shot. But if you're not, then I think one is like, how do you get your foot into the process? Like, how do you actually start the interviews? And it is obviously there is friction in it that I faced because it was not so straightforward. Like Microsoft doesn't recruit designers from IIT Roorkee. So the route that I took was like to take part in hackathons, right? So like Code Pandu, I participated in that, and my team ended up being, I think, in the top three. I think we ended up being the campus winner. So when that happens, then you have the opportunity, like they give you an opportunity to interview, right? And by default, it's a software developer interview. But in my case, I negotiated with them and told them that I'm interested in design, right? So I use that method to get my foot in the door. Sometimes you can use all these other kinds of methods to basically get your foot in the door, for like even being like on their list for the people they're interviewing, right? So that definitely has more friction, but I think it's still doable, if you participate in, let's say, student challenges, or if you basically write to a lot of people, keep applying, right? Sometimes you do end up getting noticed. And once you get your foot into the interview process, I think after that, what matters is not really your background, because you've already made it to the list of people who are getting interviewed, right? What really is going to matter is like what you do with the assignment or the interview that they give you, right? And if you can really prove that you can solve the complexity, if you are a good designer, you have the right kind of bent of thinking as well as craft and skill and communication, then I feel like you can make it, right? I think it's like up to you. If you are able to prove that you can handle this, like you are skilled enough for it, you will get through. And I don't think after that point it really matters what your background is. In fact, I know a lot of people in Microsoft and Meta that I've come across who are not from a traditional design background, right? They are from other fields who then eventually got into design and then made their way into these companies. So it's very common, and people are very open to giving people a shot. It's all up to like how your portfolio is and how you basically tackle the interview process.
Right. Right. So, like, since you worked in Indian companies like Oyo, Housing.com, and you worked in companies like Microsoft and Meta, so what difference have you felt in the hiring process, in the work culture, or the expectation from the candidates? Yeah. So, what's that?
Okay, I think you asked me three things, right? Difference in hiring process, work culture, and expectations. I
Yeah.
think I'll tackle hiring and expectations first. So I'm with startups. I think it's not always a very clearly defined hiring machinery in the sense that it really depends what are the kinds of rounds that they want to do. It can be really flexible. The timeline of the internship can be also really flexible. The process can change, right, depending on your profile and whoever is making the decision. Whereas in big companies, it tends to be very much more formalized. So they have periods and windows in which they run the internship program, right? And the way to interview is like in a certain way. They will have dedicated recruiters who set up the whole process and the rounds, and you have a set of rounds, and like every round will have a different kind of a thing, and like you will be briefed properly on like what's going to happen. So there's just more structure to the hiring at big companies as compared to startups, where it's more of like spontaneous, I feel. Some of the startups can also have their own structure in the way it's fleshed out, but bigger companies will have just more of a structure around it, right? In terms of expectations, I would say it is, I mean, yeah, if you're a good designer, and by that I mean that your craft and hard skills are showing through your project, and then you're able to communicate well. I think those things are something that both startups and big companies are looking for. But in big companies, there might be a little bit more emphasis on the how well you're able to communicate and handle Q&A and handle basically presenting and like talking to stakeholders a little bit more. So that might communication as aspect might get focused on slightly more. And that is only because in bigger organizations you have to work across a lot of teams, and sometimes in order to execute something you first need to do a lot of stakeholder convincing, a lot of like meetings, presentations, and all of that, right? So it just ends up mattering a little bit more in terms of the expectation. And the second thing you said about work culture, I think from what I see, um, it's been some things have been very similar throughout, like having a design studio set up. So startups can vary, like really small startups might not have that when they have a very few number of designers, right? They might not have this whole studio kind of a design team set up. But when I was at Oyo and Housing.com, I think they had a very great design studio environment there. And bigger companies also, from what I've seen, it's pretty similar, right? It's just on a much bigger scale. So you'll just get a global design studio setup when you're working in a bigger company, whereas when a startup, it's going to be mostly Indian people. But I feel like like the amount of talent um, can be very great even in startups, right? Because I feel India is anyway like whenever like I work with global teams inside Meta also, a lot of the designers that I'm collaborating with who are based in London or based in US are actually Indian only. So I feel like Indians have a very good talent density, and you can find that in Indian startups also. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. So, there is a lot of buzz about ChatGPT AI and how it can replace almost every job. So, and like we all know that these tools can make UI for you guys, and like, what do you think about that, and what's the take on this?
um So honestly, this is a great question. What I think about it is that I don't think it's gonna replace creative sort of professions at all. I feel like it's gonna like greatly enhance our capability to work also, right? And also parallelly, it's gonna be another way for us to create. So when I look at tools like Midjourney, right, where you can auto-generate art, you can auto-generate images, you can create a bunch of stuff through prompts. I feel like that's another form of creation, right? But it doesn't completely replace, let's say, doing a painting, right? The
Yeah,
same way that photography came along, but it did not really replace painting, right? Like you can take photos, yes, but that doesn't mean that if I like a view that I cannot paint it, or like my painting is not going to have any value, right? So similar, I think it's like similar, right? Like there's like different forms of expression, and this can become one. And this is specifically towards just like art and graphic design that I'm talking,
yeah,
right? So it might become very much mass use. Like for example, photography is maybe like um used a lot more than like actual paintings now. So it can be the same, but it's not going to like replace or like completely kill out the other forms of art that we have, right? Which are more like human made. um Another thing that I feel is that when humans create art or graphic design or whatever that is, a lot of it is based on their lived experience, right? In the way that they can create original work, right? So the example is that I can tell Midjourney or whatever Dali to like, hey, make this scene in the style of Van Gogh, right? And it can do it, but it cannot come up with a new style on its own in the same way that Van Gogh basically came up with that style, because he had like a life journey. He experienced a lot of pain and psychological trauma, and like he used to take all of these meds, and then he basically created this art, right? Because of his life situation, which is not something that AI can do right now.
Yeah.
Maybe if, but not right now, right? It cannot come up with that original style of its own. What it can do really well is that it can draw from everything that's been done so far and then give you like the next best version or like a similar version of it, right? So in that ways, I feel like there are some things where all the human side of things cannot be recreated in some ways, right? um and when I come to design and like just design tools, like I've been seeing a lot of Figma plugins, like Diagram, a startup, is building a lot of stuff as well,
Yeah.
right? Something called Genius.ai. So all of these tools that can auto generate a bunch of things inside Figma, that can auto design a bunch of things. And honestly, I look at it as like it's great, right? Like I never had to design an icon myself anymore, right? I mean, I never have to do all the manual bits of designing anymore. It's like having a co-pilot or an assistant do all of, or an assistant do all of that for me, right? So it's kind of like how in Photoshop we used to have to do a lot more manual labor to design the same screen, that right now in Figma, if we use auto layout and we design it, it's much easier to do it,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
Yeah, so that ways I feel like with AI it's gonna be like even a step more easier, right? Like I can auto generate a bunch of things and then use them, so I can design much faster than I could before, right? So it's like the evolution, like the next level of tools. But I still feel like right now we are in the driving seat of using the tools. Like it's not become like, it's not like we have like general level intelligence, super intelligence, and like we are not even needed anymore. Maybe sometime in the future that also happens, but it's still, I would say, at least 5 years out. And I don't know what's gonna happen like after that happens, but right now I feel like it's still very relevant, um, to have creative people and designers do the work, right? It's like another analogy that I was looking at. I think someone had written a thread on Twitter, is like we have all of these direct templates for every kind of design, right? But that doesn't mean that those can replace designers.
Right.
So same kind of thing where you have this tool where you can write prompts and it can make generic screens, but that doesn't mean that you would not need a designer anymore, or like that design is going to be good enough or like original enough for you to just use on your app.
Yeah. Yeah. So now let's just talk about your current work in life. So as a senior product designer at Meta, what are your roles and responsibilities, and what kind of projects you are working at?
Okay, so I can't reveal a lot about the projects themselves because they tend to
Yeah.
be a little, yeah, under NDA. But basically, I work in the integrity and content moderation space. So that's a complicated space. It sits between advertisers and Meta users, and basically everything that you see, right, it goes through multiple layers of thought, to make sure that it's safe, it's not illegal, nobody's trying to scam you, and you have the right ways to sort of address the system if you do see something that you feel is, let's say, illegal or harmful or abusive, right? So there are all these categories of bad actors or bad things that can happen on the platform, and basically how do we make sure that it doesn't happen. Meta generally does a much better job of it than I would say Twitter or a bunch of other platforms, and that's only because the content moderation at Meta is something that is um, been at play for a long time, and they have a very deep and complex understanding of how this whole thing runs and how do we basically um, orchestrate it, right? So that's the sort of product space that I work with. And in terms of like how a product designer functions at Meta, I feel like the boundaries are very blurred, in terms of just a product manager, a product designer, and in some places even a front end engineer, right? So it's in Meta, a lot of the work happens very autonomously. So it's not always very clearly defined, like you have to do the job of defining it also yourself, right? Well, which is where I mentioned that there's some amount of project or like project slash product management that comes in, because there's a writing culture. You have to basically think of stuff, like draw from research, come up with a plan, like make a proposal of like why something needs to happen, how does it need to happen, who are the people that you need to work with to make it happen. So all of this onus is sort of on individual people themselves. It's very like it's a very open ended way of working, right? So that ways, as a designer, you also have to do that part of that side of things. It's not like a product manager is going to do the entire roadmap and just like hand it over on a plate to you. You have to be very much involved in driving it. And then the design part obviously exists, where you have to basically design stuff, work with other designers and like align it and like basically make it, iterate it, shippable, work with engineers. And I know a lot of designers at Meta who code also. I don't code myself, but um, in Meta, at least what I've seen is that sometimes the boundaries can be blurred, in the sense that if you work with engineers, sometimes they will self enable you to make smaller changes yourself. So they will make the whole process of modifying certain widgets or like certain things in a way where designers can also self-serve some changes by writing very minimal code, or like basically making very few like requests on the platform, right? So some of that can also happen, and I think it's in the spirit of like making things move fast and like making sure that nobody is blocked on each other, that people work this way. There's a lot of, I feel, in Meta also focus on experimentation and numbers. So as a designer, for me that was a huge learning that I had at Meta. Was like yes, like everywhere else also, you are aware of like the business impact of what you work on, but at Meta I think it was much more at the forefront, like the exact numbers of what's the metric that's going to move when we do this design change, and how do we measure the impact of every design change, or like basically, yeah. So every design change was sort of backed or justified by an experiment or a metric that moves. So that is something that is also slightly unique about Meta. Yeah.
So as a senior, as you are in the senior position now, so you must have interviewed a lot of candidates, right? Or yeah. So like, so what do you look in a portfolio of a candidate, or do you have any tips for creating great portfolios?
Yeah, I think um, when people are looking at portfolios, like at least like from whatever I've seen or whatever I've seen from even people who are more senior than me, I think brevity is really important. So people will typically not spend too much time going in details of your portfolio till probably later stages, right? So the first screening that happens, people don't spend a lot of time on your portfolio. So one thing that really needs to come through is like how you optimize your portfolio for a 5 minute user journey, right? So you can think of like what is the user journey that you want someone who's not going to spend maximum 5 minutes on your portfolio, like where all should they go, what is the main thing that you want to tell them, and then design your portfolio website according to that. So that use that to position your content or messaging, use that to position pictures or projects links, use that to also do the case studies inside, right? Like if someone skims through, right, like if they maybe design your case study in a way where someone can skim through it in 30 seconds and still get a gist, versus if someone wants to read it more, maybe they can spend time and go into the depth, but they don't need to do that to understand the case study, right? So design it for basically brevity, design it to be like pack the maximum impact in the minimum amount of time. So that is very, very important. And the second thing is, I think, just basic hygiene and craft, right? So are you using the right kind of contrast, are you using the right kind of font pairing, typography? It doesn't have to be super amazing, but I think it has to be to a certain level of craft and standard for it to shine through. And basically, is your portfolio responsive? Because maybe if someone's opening out phone and if it doesn't really work really well, that's also a problem. So I think these are some of the things. And then within case studies, right, like be very intentional on what are the case studies that are putting, and which are the ones that you want people to focus on, right? And then just have those. You don't need to have too many projects, right? Or even if you have many, which are the ones that you show first, and then what is the content inside it, just make
Right.
that really good, right? Because nobody's going to go through all your case studies. Maybe they will, but they'll probably make up their mind in the first few whether they want to see more or not, right? If the first few are not good, they will not go through the rest anyway. So just like focus more and reduce. I think that's one thing. And the other thing that I think stands out is just, so this is all functional, what I said, right? So this is this whole functional design angle of it, like understanding who's going to see it, how much time they're going to spend, and design around that. But the other thing is like just emotional design. So it's like, how do you want, like, every designer has their own unique feel, right? Like their own unique personality. And how do you want that to come out from your portfolio? Like the person who's looking at your portfolio is not really meeting you as such, but can they still get a feel or a vibe of who you are as a designer, as a person? And there are multiple ways to do that, right? One is the most direct way, where you put like, hey, I have these other hobbies, and like maybe feature some of your art or some of your photography or like stuff like that directly on the portfolio, or add links to other places, or just add like maybe interesting content that you've written, like basically add all of that. The other way to do it is just visual design and how you design your portfolio. I know some people can be very playful with how they do their portfolio, right? So you can actually have like a game up front, and like you can have, let's say, like a pixel art kind of a feel to it, or you can have a 3D feel. You can have like all of these different things that you can play around in terms of just emotional design, and like what is the feel that you want to convey about who you are as a designer, right? But yeah, I would prioritize the functional aspect before the second one, although it's really good to have that also. Like I feel like emotional design can sometimes play a larger role also when you're being selected, because a certain thing spoke to someone, right? Like I feature a lot of my 3D art in my portfolio, and a lot of the times a lot of people reach out because of that, because they are like, hey, this is really cool, or we feel like in this particular role it's like a good asset to have this also. And it shows that I am creative and I have other hobbies that go just beyond just the day job, right? So that's another thing that you can do. One more thing that I've seen people doing, and I've sort of liked that, is to add recommendations that you might have from other people somewhere in your portfolio, either inside the project. So let's say you worked on an internship project, right? And you're featuring that in your portfolio. Like if the stakeholders and leaders in that company have given you any recommendation or positive feedback when you were working with them, feature that also like in the project, right? And that helps more in terms of just building that social proofing of your work. I know people put up LinkedIn recommendations, but also adding it in your portfolio could be a good thing. Right? So that is also important. And then in terms of the tools of building a portfolio, honestly, like when I was starting out, it used to, the option was like a custom coded portfolio version that you do out of your own, or you use more like a template website. And some of the template websites have gotten really good over time, like Squarespace and stuff, where you can get very creative. And in the old times, Tumblr was also like a decentish option, right? But now I feel like the tools are next level. I would say that there's Webflow. Obviously, if you're willing to put in a little bit more effort, Webflow can let you do a lot of things. Like you can add up animations to it. You can basically customize everything, right? So Webflow is great. But if you don't want to like code, one of my friends were recently building out their portfolio, and they were using Framer to do it. And I think Framer is a really good option to do it, because you can design in Figma and also make it live and not have to like write code, and it's responsive. So all of that is taken care of, and it has a lot of flexibility in putting your content. So Framer, and then it's really good as a tool if you learn Framer, right? So you build your portfolio in Framer, you learn how to use Framer, and your portfolio is amazing, and you learn a new tool as well. So that ways I feel like Frame, like if I were to redo my portfolio, I probably would want to do Framer. Notion is also a very decent option. I know a lot of people do just like a MVP Notion portfolio. That's also pretty good. For me though, I mean, I like if the portfolio has some personality to it. So I generally like, and Notion portfolios end up being very similar. Like they're functionally, yes, they'll tell you everything, but they don't have a lot of personality. So that ways I would prefer like a Framer or like a Webflow portfolio, which is custom made.
Yeah, that's great. So, like just a follow-up question to that, like as I said, the website should be responsive enough, and like, uh, usually nowadays people are going ahead with Figma prototype also. So,
Yeah.
like, just to just to make sure that, uh, the recruiters go through your Figma file also, and they can check how you have designed the file and you have done all the auto layouts, or just they go through your basic UIs. So what do you think, that is it a good option or not? Like,
Honestly, I think it's a pretty decent option. It doesn't work on phone, but the way you can caveat is that just say that this is better suited for desktop, right? So just caveat it up front, and then people will just watch it on desktop. And in terms of being able to see actual Figma work, I think it works seamlessly. I know people who have their portfolio on Figma, and these are very talented. Like even senior designers at Microsoft, some of them have their portfolio built via Figma itself. So I think it works superbly well. The only thing I would add is like if you're doing it in Figma anyway, it's very easy to just integrate it into Framer. Like you can literally use the same frame and import it inside Framer and work with it. So yeah, that might also help.
yeah, okay. So I think that's a lot of information. I'm sure this is going to be an inspiration for all of the college students who are, starting their career in the field of design. So up next, you must have a lot of good memories in college. So can you think of one memory that you can say that this was the best memory at IIT Roorkee?
Oh my God. Let me think. So I think there are some great memories. There was just more like recurring everyday things that add to the vibe of the college, right? It's yes, sure, you have these mega moments where you win something or you have like a special personal moment or something which stand out. But I think for me, when I think back to the college times, what stands out to me is just the simple everyday things that we used to do, but that really like in my mind, they used to make the vibe of the campus, right? So, for example, like going out to, let's say, Desi Tadka, or before that, there were a few other joints where we used to go out, right, to have like butter chicken, and like we used to go out in college groups, and that was like a really cool thing, like just going out and eating. I remember like the winter days when we used to go out, and there used to be like fog in the campus, and there used to have like really nice flowers everywhere, like roses all around campus, and you can just walk around in front of the main building and like all of these other roads, and there's like a lot of fog around. It's very romantic. I think that's something that I think of a lot. And then there was this whole when CCD and everything came in, me and my friends used to go there like every day, like sometimes multiple times a day, and we had like this fixed seat where we used to sit. It was like how in Friends they have this couch where you'll always see them sitting. Like me and my one of my friends, especially like in the final years, like we were always sitting on that couch. So in fact, people like recognize that couch as belonging to us because we were always there. So like these are the things that and like make it special. Like the architecture department canteen, I don't know if it's still functional, but I used to really like the samosa and the chutney that they used to have in that canteen. So all of these things are something that I think make the whole experience really, really special, right? Living door to door with your friends. I don't think like these things happen later on in life. I think everyone just goes in different directions. You don't really, live in that hostel sort of a lifestyle anymore. So those are the things that I think enjoyed the most and I miss the most.
Yeah. So, what will be your final piece of advice for the freshers, or the people who are struggling with the career in college, and for the students, you know, who don't have placements right now and struggling with the time of recession?
Yeah. I think my advice would be that it's a very difficult time, right? It's way worse than what your seniors had to see. So I would say, like, don't compare with other people or your seniors, because it's not that, like, I don't put it on yourself, right? Like, don't think that you're not talented enough because you are getting rejected. It's not that. I feel like a lot of juniors are maybe more talented than I was when I was in that level, or like college. I see people are way more talented now, right? So but I still got internships because I think that was a different market, right? So do acknowledge this, don't compare, and don't bog yourself down by rejection, because it's not because of your talent. It's just because that market is very different right now, right? So keep at it and like keep upskilling yourself, because I still feel like no matter how bad the market is, technology as a sector, like I do believe in technology as being the future, as being the main driver of economy for at least the next 50 100 years, right? So it'll always bounce back, it'll always have different kinds of opportunities that will show up. Right now things are different, they are readjusting, but that doesn't mean that you would not be able to have a bright future eventually, right? So just keep at it, keep upskilling, and maybe try out like different paths. um Talk to people who've, like, instead of immediate seniors, maybe who sort of got out during the boom phase. Talk to people who have been in the industry for longer and who've seen like lows and highs, right? And talk to people on how to handle through the lows wala phases. Rely a lot on your network, right? So try to build out people who know your work, right? Because oftentimes when there are so many talented people in the market, like how do you get hired, right? Like so many talented people are there and there are very few openings. So having a network of people who know your work, who know your worth, I think having that's going to give you an edge also. So yeah, just try to build that and just try to like not lose motivation to keep working hard is what I would recommend. Like what would my advice be for everyone right now?
All right. All right, Parinishtha, thank you so much for sparing some time for us and talking to us and giving us so much knowledge. And I'm sure the audience is going to take a lot of takeaways from this conversation of ours and then excel in their own journeys. And I wish a best of luck to you for your future endeavors. Thank you.
Thank thank you, have a nice evening, bye bye.